Hi, everyone, and welcome to First Draft Friday. This is episode number 73. I am your host with Authors AI. My name is Alessandra Torre, and I am joined today by Melissa F. Miller, who writes thrillers of all shapes and sizes. We'll talk a little bit about that. But Melissa, do you want to just introduce yourself to the audience and share a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Alessandra. And I'm really excited to be here talking about multiple points of view, my jam. I'm a crime fiction writer. I've written and do write mystery, romantic suspense, and various thriller subgenres, legal, medical, and adventure thrillers. But I'm primarily a thriller writer. And we can talk about why I love writing thrillers the way that we're going to talk about. But so I've been writing published my first book in 2011. So that's 13 years. I was going to count before this, 40, 50. My bio is not up to date, somewhere between 40 and 50 novels, all in the crime fiction family. I was a practicing lawyer for 15 years. So my first novels were legal thrillers because, write what you know. But very few people died in my office or led me on a car chase. So writing was just more fun. So here I am.
I love that. And today, if you didn't receive our email about this, we're going to be talking a lot about primarily writing in multiple third-person point of views. And we will be talking about this from the thriller genre side of things. But Melissa, do you think that this will be applicable to other genres as well?
I do. I think definitely women's fiction, literary fiction. There are mystery writers who write third-person multiple points of view. I'm thinking of Louise Penny. But she can kind of break some rules that maybe the rest of us shouldn't. I think romance can be third person. It can be first, but my romantic suspense or third person dual narration. So I think you can apply it to anything you want.
I love that. So for those of you joining us that are newer authors, and as always with First Draft Friday, please don't be shy. The comment section is all yours. So anyone who's watching, if you have questions as we go or comments, you can pop them into the comment section if you're joining us on YouTube or Facebook.
I'm going to correct myself. I guess I wouldn't write memoir in multiple third-person point of view. But.
Yeah, unless you're schizophrenic. So unless you have dissociative identity disorder, then go for it. But when we're talking about third person, what we really are talking about is instead of using that I voice, you're speaking almost from a watching standpoint, right? Where the characters are referred to by their names. And then when we're talking about different point of views for that, can you go into a little bit about if you start a scene and maybe there's a book of yours that we can use as a reference point. I didn't mean to throw that on you, but if you have a book that we can use as a reference point, but if you're starting a scene, how do you establish kind of whose point of view you're in, even though you're in third person point of view?
Right. No. So yes.
Yes. Yes to all.
So, even when you're writing third person, you have a main character, you have a protagonist and an antagonist. Most of my scenes, are written from my protagonist's point of view because it's usually it's her story. But the fun thing about using multiple points of view is you can decide who is the best person to tell the story of this scene. So this is an example. Sometimes the first person on the page in one of my books is going to die. Usually I don't start a book with my protagonist. I just don't. At this point in a long series, we all know her. We know she's coming in. So we want to meet the players of this story. And an example would be, so right now I'm writing the second book in my Maisie Farley series, and that book's called Dead Man's Hollow, and it's coming out in the spring. And the first book, and so I just reread the first book. So we'll talk about that one because it's top of mind.
Sure.
So the protagonist in that book is a former journalist named Maisie. She's not the first character we see. The first character we see is a woman who's boarding a plane. I'm lying. She is the first person because it was the first book in her series. But so in that book, we have Maisie, who has most of the scenes. There's a woman whose ex-husband has died and she has to go take care of his affairs. So we see some scenes from her point of view. We see some scenes from the antagonist points of view. So the first thing I need to do is figure out, like, whose scene is this, right? Who is the best person to tell this story? And in a thriller, the reader has information that the characters don't have. In a mystery, you're with the detective, you know what the detective knows. But in a thriller, the reader knows things that the main character doesn't, that some characters don't know. So it's a chance to give the reader some information that Maisie doesn't have. It's also a way to humanize the villain because, you know, everyone's the hero of their own story, right? So those scenes told from the villain's point of view. Now, this is sort of just a little nit of mine. I don't like spending time with unlikable characters. Like, if I don't like the character, I don't want to read their book. So even if they are a psychopath, they must think they're likable in some way. So getting inside their head with them is just a way to let the reader sort of see what's, like, if this book was the bad guy's book, he'd be the hero, and here's why. Here's what's motivating him. So in that book, Steel Town Magnolia, the first scene is Maisie, and then we see this woman on a plane, and then we see a couple at home a few nights before Christmas. And all of those people have scenes in the first 10% of the book. And then, you know, as I go along, I think, okay, we haven't heard from Bella in a while. You know, we should check in with Bella. It's a way to keep, so here's why I love it. It's a way to keep the tension up and the pacing quick, because you end a scene with a question or, you know, a mini cliffhanger, and then you go to someone else's point of view, and then you end their scene with an open question. So at the end of every chapter, you're thinking, okay, what happens? Where did this, what is this key open? But then the next chapter, you're like, why is she in the basement? It just keeps the reader always wanting to turn the pages. Yeah. It also keeps me honest on, I'm not a plotter. So it almost imposes a structure of its own, because you have all these people's stories. They all are progressing along their own arc, and their arcs are intersecting. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And we have some good questions and comments that are responding to you. So when you say, like, I start with, you know, Maisie's point of view, you know, and then I move to the antagonist. Marlon said, are there, from YouTube, are there ways to inform the reader whose point of view the chapter is in, besides just titling each chapter with that character's name? And do you title each chapter with the character's name of your point of view, or do you show that point of view in other ways?
So I do not. I have not in any of my thrillers. I don't think. I have a romantic comedic comedy that is told in first person, and each of the sisters has their own book, and they get married. And at their weddings, there are 3 characters who we know really well. So their names are chapter titles. I do that. But ordinarily, in the ordinary course, I don't use their names. And the way you do it is exactly what you said, right? Very often in the first sentence or the first paragraph, I'll say, you know, it was cold and snowing, and everyone in Pittsburgh was ready for winter to end, but not Maisie. Maisie loved the snow. And so we know it's Maisie, and she's thinking about growing up in Georgia, and she never saw snow. And then you just have to develop a different voice for every character, so that as soon as you drop into a new chapter, your reader thinks, okay, this is Tim's chapter, this is Maisie's chapter. And it's usually fairly clear because they're not always together. Mm-hmm. But when two viewpoint characters are in a scene together, you really I have to kind of remind myself, this is Maisie's scene. This isn't Jenna's scene. So we're not a person who's struggling with fertility. We're a woman whose old employer's not paying her payout. So like she's worried about money, not her health. Jenna's worried about her health. And then I just write with their thoughts in my head.
So we have great questions, and to everyone who's asking, we are going to talk back about switching point of views and kind of how she writes on the fly like that. But I just want to follow this path a little bit further. So if you do have two characters that you're representing both of their point of views throughout the story, and they are in a scene together, what dictates that this third person point of view is in this character's point of view? What are the rules that you have to follow? Are you seeing their thoughts? Are you only aware of what that character knows in terms of information? Like, how are you communicating that this is this character's point of view?
Yes, both of those. You would, so Maisie and Jenna are in a scene together, and it's Maisie's scene. We don't know what Jenna's thinking in this scene. Okay. In her own scene, we do, but in Maisie's scene, we know what she's thinking. We can see her watching Jenna's reaction, right? She can see Jenna's expression. Jenna can't see her own expression. So we know what Maisie knows. We feel, or we have access to what Maisie thinks and feels. And we're seeing the scene through the lens or filter that Maisie would see it in.
Yeah.
And so for me, I don't head hop. I think that some people are, that's absolutely not a rule. Like, you cannot break that rule. I know there are writers who break that rule and do it beautifully. But head hopping is when you have access to two people's thoughts in the same scene. Mm-hmm. So if I need to switch to someone else's thoughts, like if Maisie just dropped a bomb and we want to know how the other person is reacting, then I just have a scene break. Like, I have a scene break, and now we're in Jenna's head.
So you don't necessarily switch chapters?
Usually I switch chapters, but if it's short and it's a scene and I want to keep them together for some reason, mm-hmm. I'll at least have, a scene break with a new header, like new drop cap.
Yeah, that makes sense. So when you were talking about kind of, you like to switch point of views to keep the story moving and also to keep you as a writer, like journeying down the path. Someone said from Facebook, that's really interesting. Do you normally have these scenes mapped out, or are you really just, okay, I'm back in Maisie's point of view, what is going to happen right now?
Yeah, I don't. So I say I'm not a plotter. I do not sit down with an outline and scenes and beat. I sit down with an idea, and then I say, okay, who should start this story? And then I know who the characters are, and I know I know what the story is about, but I don't have a plan. So a lot of times because I don't plot, sometimes in the middle, things get a little messy and I have to kind of stop. And then I'll get out the color-coded index cards, and everybody gets a color. Maisie's purple, Jenna's yellow, Tim is blue, and I lay them out and I look at my scenes and I say, oh, we've got a whole bunch of blue scenes in a row. We probably should find out what Tim's doing. And so that's how I keep myself organized, maybe. Yeah. But I wanted to say another thing that is so awesome is that it really lets the reader kind of like get attached to all the characters, not just your main character, because even when your main character is not on the page, there's someone sharing their story with them. So but I used to, when I first started writing, worry that everybody needed equal time. And I've read enough thrillers to know that you can have a viewpoint character who literally has one scene and then dies. You can have a viewpoint character who shows up at the 70% mark. I wouldn't know that until after the fact because I haven't, sketched it out. But when I was looking at Steel Town Magnolia to start my next book in the series, Dead Man's Hollow, this book has 6 viewpoint characters. One of them doesn't show up till 25%, and the other one doesn't show up until 70. Everyone else is in there a lot, but it's just whatever's in service of the story.
I also like it because it allows you to, like, when you're in a character's head, they have a certain opinion of themselves and how they're perceived by others, and what kind of person they are. And then I love, like, having the reader introduced to that perception, and then seeing the character from another character's point of view, and it could be very, very different, in terms of what they look like, or even what, I mean, not that we're talking about two, but somebody might have a very high opinion of themselves and think that everyone loves them, and then you see them from another character's point of view, and it's
it's different,
right? Everyone thinks they're egotistic and can't stand them or something.
Right. Or you have someone that we meet and don't like because our viewpoint character doesn't like them, but then we kind of hear their story and you think, well, they're not that bad. Yeah. It's fun.
100%. So just a second, I'm writing a note to myself so I don't forget this. Someone asked about kind of info dumping. I think what they're asking is kind of, how do you catch the reader up on what has happened since they were last with Macy, or a detective or something like that? If you've been in a couple of other point of views, do you pick right back up where you left that character, or sometimes do you have you progressed a week or so in time, and then how do you kind of let them know what that character has discovered or whatever in the meantime? Do you need to, or is the reader smart enough and they just kind of fill in the gaps?
Sure. No, that's a great question. So I write short scenes and short chapters. So I have a book that has 75,000 word book. For me would have maybe 50 chapters. Like, they're short. So I trust you as the reader to keep this stuff in your head for a while. But also I try to make the flow organic. Like, the question that gets left off in Bella's chapter, whatever she's wondering about, it's going to lead into the next person's point of view. Like, it's connected.
Right.
And I don't have big sweeping timelines. A lot of my timelines are pretty compressed. If I do have to jump forward in time, I might at the top of that chapter say, 2 weeks later, Maisie got the reports back, blah, blah, blah.
That makes sense. Another author on Facebook said, how much head hopping then per page? Any set percentage for aspiring authors to follow, or just go with character flow?
Okay, so if by head hopping we mean going from one character's inner thoughts to another character's inner thoughts, so I would say 0 per page, right? Like, in a scene. That's sort of the traditional advice. No head hopping. I think, Nora Roberts head hops, Louise Penny. Well, if you're writing third person, you can always say that you are an omniscient narrator, right? And so it's not head hopping because your narrator knows everybody's thoughts. Yeah. But I write close. Like, I write a close perspective narrator. So for me, I don't head hop on the same page. If there's a scene break, it's an actual break. Like, there's a question. We don't get the resolution we want. Like, there's a little disaster, and then we're going to go on, and I'll switch there. So I don't.
Maybe
I'm not the right person to answer this.
Yeah. How long do you spend in one character's point of view before you move to the next? Are you normally there? You said you write short chapters. Are you there like 500 to 1,000 words? Are you sometimes in a character's point of view for 5,000 words? Or does it vary just depending on the scene?
That does, I think, vary what works for the story, character flow. I mean, I'll be in someone's point of view for anywhere from one scene to maybe 3 chapters. That's not a hard and fast rule. I just think probably after 3 chapters with one person, unless they're traveling or locked in a closet or something, I don't know, I would switch.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And so you do multiple you will do multiple chapters at a time in one. It's not every time. Okay.
And yes, I would say I didn't count this all the way up, but in Steel Town Magnolia, the bad guys amongst themselves have 14 chapters, 14 scenes. 2 other characters between them have 20, and all of the rest of the scenes are Maisie's. Mm-hmm. So that's probably like another 40 scenes, probably 40. Mm-hmm. So she would obviously have back-to-back scenes.
Yeah, back-to-back. That's a great, helpful breakdown. Yeah, that's fantastic. So kind of talking about what you were talking about with omnipresent and that sort of thing. Someone said, many of the masters use free, direct, in-style point of view, which combines third person with the intimacy of first person, where the character gets to see the character's internal thoughts. A lot of Nora Roberts, John Irving, Stephen King does this. Do you ever do that? And it sounds like you do third person, but where they can see the character's internal thoughts.
I do. Yes. But I am not comparing myself to John Irving, Stephen King, or Nora Roberts.
You
just so clear.
Understood. So I had a question, and that's when you are writing the villains, or the potential villains, how do you hide their identity? And maybe you don't. Maybe in all of your books, you're using their name, and maybe their paths just haven't yet crossed. But if I am wanting to keep my villain a secret, and try to get the reader to guess who it is, how would I hide their identity in third person?
Okay, so I don't do this much. The twist I put on my villains is we often have access to like a minion's point of view, but not their bosses, or we have access to the ultimate villain's point of view, but nobody knows they're the villain, and you just have to write it carefully, so that when they find out that this is a different book. Oh, Vivian was calling all the shots the whole time. If you go back and you read those scenes again with that knowledge, it's there, right? Like it's a really fine line to walk. Yeah. I know that some of the Jack Reacher books, Lee Child will have, just won't name them. I'm trying to think. There's one that there are 2 bad guys and they have code names, and I think they were Romeo and Juliet, but it's been a while since I read this book. And so he would refer to them that way, and we don't find out till the end who they actually are and that we've known them the whole book. So that's another way to do it. Yeah, you just don't use their name or their real name.
Yeah, and like you said, you can have the villain be a character, and they just don't realize that they're the villain. I was envisioning something more like, like he's cutting up, a corpse. So clearly he's the villain, but how do you keep that? And I cheat with this a lot of times, and I'll write my villains in first person point of view, especially if I'm trying to hide their gender, because I don't want to, it's the easiest way for me not to give it away by he or she.
Right. No, because you're narrowing the suspect pool if you do.
Right. Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
And so you said you sometimes write first person and third person in the same book, right?
Yeah. I actually do that a lot for my first 15 books, I'd say, or 20 books. My main characters were always in first person, and all of my other character point of views were in third person. And I didn't do a ton. It was like yours. It was like a 70% main character ratio, and then the others. But I also did that because initially I wrote romance, and it was very hard for me to write from a male point of view. And it was much easier for me to write from a male point of view if I was in third person. But writing first person for male felt very awkward for me. Okay. Someone said, let's see. I just want to make sure I got, someone said, you seem to be shining, Melissa, Penning in different genres. Why would it be advisable for aspiring authors to write in different genres? Is that something you recommend?
So I think that a good marketing answer would be no, you should
don't do that.
Pick a lane and stay in it. I think that's
the resounding, right? Yeah.
I'm an independent author because I don't want anyone to tell me what to do. So I guess if you want to head hop. Don't let me tell you what to do. But I started out writing legal thrillers and I enjoyed them. And then I just wanted to do something a little bit different, just a little bit different. So I wrote, just a suspense thriller. And then I wanted to do something a little bit different late. And I have almost all of my thriller main characters in my series are women. But after maybe 20, 25 books, I had a male character who I was like, I want to tackle his point of view, which like you, in the beginning, I was like, I'm a woman. I'm going to write women. So I have a series where the main character is a practicing Buddhist. He's a retired forensic pathologist and he's nonviolent. Like he's so different from my other characters in addition to being a man. Mm-hmm. But I need that. Like I need that variety as a writer. If you are very serious about a career, you should not take any advice from me because I kind of, it was a different time when I started. My first book was in 2011. I was lucky enough to be able to stop practicing law and do this full time, which meant I had a lot of time to write. So if I write something and I'm like, oh, this isn't great, okay, I'll just go write something else. But if you're early in your career, you shouldn't listen to me.
And I have to say, I did the exact same thing as Melissa. I wrote whatever I felt like. I mean, not that that's what you did, but there were times where I got tired of writing this. And so I wrote this. And it is the worst thing in terms of building an audience and a market, and creating a brand for yourself. But we as writers are creative souls. So a lot of times there is like the right thing to do and the smart thing to do. And then there is our passion and what, and the stories that speak to us. But I am the same way. I would advise an aspiring author or a newer author to find their niche as quickly as they can and then write solidly in that niche and not diversify their type of books. But both of us are happy. I think you're happy.
It worked out.
Yeah. And
right. You kind of have to
because we love this.
Right. If I want to do something that fills me up, otherwise I'd still be practicing law. Right. So if I want to write, I wrote last year a book. I took time out of my whole schedule to write like a traditional English countryside closed circle mystery, sort of in the Agatha Christie style. And I just put all of my characters in there. And my husband was like, I don't really understand why you're writing this book. Because I want to.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. And we did a first draft Friday with a bunch of cozy mystery authors. And I was like, this seems like the most fun thing to do ever is to write cozy mysteries, and have so many holiday themed events. And, but yes, we've gotten a little off topic. So we have less than 2 minutes left. If you have any final questions for Melissa, now is the time. Melissa, is there anything you wanted to share about writing in third person that we didn't get to before I cut us off?
I don't know. I feel like I hope I came here as the ultimate hype man for third person, multiple point of view. Like it's really fun. I think it can be intimidating maybe when you're starting out to think about having all those points of view, but it just gives you so much freedom to play.
I do have a question. So have you ever gone through and just written one character's point of view at a time, or you're in that character's point of view and you have that mini cliffhanger and you just kind of go ahead and write the next scene, but you're going to move it down and insert some scenes in between? Or do you write as it is going to eventually be read?
So I write chronologically for my thrillers, but I'm doing a side project, which is different from anything else I've ever written. And just yesterday I did what you said. And I was like, that's weird, but I needed to stay in that person's voice for a while. I needed to follow. So,
and to be consistent. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. We do have a final question from Elaine. She said, and I love this question, who do you like to end your stories with?
I end my stories with my main character.
Always. Okay. Is that because you're in a series? If it was a standalone, would you do the same thing?
I don't know, because I've never written a standalone.
Uh-huh.
I usually end it Yeah, I think with my main character always.
And do you do epilogues typically or no?
My romantic suspense, I'll do an epilogue. Sometimes if the story calls for it.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
if I do
but
that,
and
then I
that is
haven't
the
ended
same
with them.
in your main protagonist point of view, or third person.
Yeah, I think I've written a couple books where we wrap up with my main protagonists, but then somebody who helped, like I think there's a computer guy in one of my books who helps them catch the bad guy, and then he takes off to Mexico. I think I have the last, like the epilogue, him like looking out over the ocean.
Yeah, something like a cliff, maybe a small cliffhanger for the next book or something like that. That makes sense. All right. Well, we are officially out of time. So that is a wrap on First Draft Friday number 73. It's been so much fun. Yeah, it goes fast. It's been great. Thank you to our audience. You guys are fantastic. Such great questions and comments. And such great information from you, Melissa. So thank you so much. Everyone watching, if you're watching the replay, we'll be back in 2 weeks with another First Draft Friday. And we encourage you to visit authors.ai and check out Marlo, who is our artificial intelligence that can read your story in just a few minutes and provide really exciting and interesting analysis on it. So check us out at authors.ai. And thank you all for coming. It's been great.